Hello, this is Susan Elliott, the News and Special Reports editor of Musical America. Today we are speaking with James Ginsburg. James is the founder and CEO of Cedille Recordings. It is completely artist-driven, and commercial considerations are not driving sales as they would be in a commercial label. To date, James has issued 200 recordings. Many of them have been nominated for Grammys. Several have won Grammy Awards, and virtually all of them are resourcefully curated in the sense that they are quite interesting to listen to. Thank you for joining us.
Pleasure.
And I, first of all, want to congratulate you. I've just been reading up about Say-Dee, and I see that you have many Grammy Awards, and Grammy nominations, and you've had the good sense to record many Musical America Artists of the Year, like Jenny Coe and Pacifica Quartet and Eighth Blackbird and all those great people. Let's start at the beginning here with you as the offspring of two rather prominent lawyers, one of whom is my all-time hero, along with everybody else. You went to law school, or you started to go to law school. Right. Why the recording business? What got you, how did you get the bug?
Sure. Well, I mean, I've always been a music lover, and particularly, I started collecting recordings at age 7. I did some work in the industry. I worked for None Such Records for a summer. I did some work in music PR. I reviewed recordings for American Record Guide for a number of years. I ran the classical format for the campus radio station at the University of Chicago when I was an undergraduate there. But what really gave me the idea to start a label was something I noticed as an undergraduate, which was, this is now in the mid-1980s, I would go to concerts featuring local artists or hear them perform on the live series from WFMT, our wonderful radio station. And then I'd go to Rose Records, which was the big record store in Chicago those days, and look for their recordings. And coming from New York, I just figured, you hear an artist in concert, you go to the record store and there could be a bunch of recordings. Well, actually there weren't. Other than the Chicago Symphony with George Schulte back then, basically none of the classical music activity in Chicago was being recorded. And I thought, well, somebody should be recording all these wonderful artists I'm hearing in concerts. So with my background and happening to know a really wonderful recording engineer who was working part-time at FMT then, I knew him back, he worked with me on the campus radio station. Right. I got the idea of just starting with one recording. We chose the wonderful Russian emigre pianist Dmitry Paperno for that. And then I started approaching some other artists I knew, like Easley Blackwood at the University of Chicago, David Schrader, who's the wonderful continuo player on, you name it, harpsichord, forte, piano, organ, pretty much in every ensemble around town. And quickly, the label developed a reputation such that artists started coming to me. In the meantime, I decided that I was much happier producing recordings than going to law school. So by 90, I had started both law school and essentially putting out recordings in 89. By 91, the label had become a full-time venture. And by 94, we were able to take it nonprofit, as you mentioned.
Right.
And then the whole gamut of classical recording activity became available to me, whether it be symphonies or choruses or even operas and everything in between. Yeah.
So people come to you, or do you also seek them out, or how does that work?
Typically not, although if there's an artist who's like new in town or something, I might let them make sure they know about our work. But we really operate as a resource for the artists, and we're very well known in the musical, the artistic community. So artists come to me with their passions, their project ideas, and we get to frankly release the best of them, which is a really wonderful position to be in.
How do you do that? I mean, how do you raise the money? Do you raise the money for specific projects, or is it more of a kind of a general fund, or how does that work?
Well, really all of the above. So probably most of our fundraising is general operating, whether it be from individuals or foundations, or we get some government support from the city and the state as well.
Mhm.
We have an annual gala each year, which brings in probably the biggest pot of all. But we also get project-specific support, and nothing is better than when you can line up a donor with something they're really interested in, or an artist they're interested in, or repertoire they're particularly excited about. We're always happy to make those connections. And then most recently, we noticed that, and you probably noticed this too, that vocal recording has become less and less in the industry, partly because it doesn't stream particularly well. As somebody who votes in the Grammys, I've noticed that while there's still lots of recordings to vote on in the chamber music and the solo artist categories, when you get to the solo vocal and the opera, there's not nearly as many.
Right.
I think this is still a very important, area to be recorded, and artists who really need to get their names out there. And it also, of course, vocal music happened to be a great passion of my mother's. So at our gala last year, which happened to fall on the second anniversary of her passing, we launched something called the Ruth Bader Ginsburg Fund for vocal recordings, through which we've now raised over $200,000 specifically for vocal projects, which I think is going to be really important.
Great, great. And those vocal projects, are they specific to artists, or are they specific to repertoire, or both?
Both, really. I mean, we're recording a lot of solo artists. This summer, I'm recording albums, for example, with Will Liverman, which will be his second album for Say-Dee. And he's, of course, a very important artist in Chicago.
Right.
Ian Kojara, a young tenor from Chicago, who actually came through the Met program, but he's from here and still resides here between gigs. He is the Helden tenor of the future, by the way, and we're really excited to be doing an album of very late romantic repertoire with him this summer as well.
Mm-hmm.
But also when a company like Haymarket Opera calls me up and says, "Hey, we're going to do this opera of the Chevalier de Saint Georges that's never been recorded before," that's obviously a repertoire decision, and I was actually in the discussions with them about, okay, who would be ideal for this cast for not only the performances but for the recording.
Mm-hmm.
And we had a working relationship with Nicole Cabell from previous Say-Dee albums, for example. So yeah, both.
So that answers my question about the degree to which you get involved, not only as the producer, but also as the sort of A&R guy in terms of casting and that sort of thing. Yeah.
Well, yeah, I mean, from the start of the label, pretty much it was just me, and artists would come to me with their ideas, and sometimes I would negotiate a little bit on repertoire, or I'd say, give me a few different project ideas, and I'll tell you which one I think, will be of the most interest to listenership and potentially to your career, et cetera. At this point, we get a lot of proposals. One year we counted about 50, and we put out about eight records a year. So I now have actually a committee on my board, which is chaired by Henry Fogel, who used to be the president of the Chicago Symphony, called my Artistic Advisory Committee, and they actually help me now get through some of the submissions. We also have created, and you can find it on the bottom of our website and on all the pages. So there's a link that says submit a proposal, and we ask all artists, even maybe veterans, to use the same form so we can really compare apples to apples when people are proposing projects.
Right. Do you have any plans to grow from 8 a year?
We already have, frankly. I think last year we put out 10 when you count the one digital. So we had like 9 physical album releases and 1 digital album release as well. So and we'll probably be at 9 again.
Right. And are you it as far as producers go?
No, definitely not. I mean, I produce the lion's share for sure.
Yeah.
But there are certain artists who have certain producers they like to work with. Also, some of the more contemporary repertoire is not exactly my specialty, and there are other producers who do it particularly well. So when Third Coast Percussion has a good relationship with someone like Elaine Martone, they work with her. Jenny O has a great relationship with Judy Sherman.
Mhm.
So she works with her. It depends on the project, depends on the artist.
Let's talk a little bit about how the money works. Do the artists ever invest in their own recordings? Do they bring money to you or to the
No, we
recording?
really, so our model is to really allow the artists to work on the music, on what they want to concentrate on. Sometimes artists will help us by identifying donors who are interested in what they're doing.
Right.
But we don't really ask the artists to raise money themselves. We have a development department, and depending on the album, there's some albums that are obvious candidates for funding from various foundations or even some individuals. There are others where we say, okay, there's not really a funding source for this project, but it's an important enough project that we'll do it out of general operating. And now, of course, we have this fund that's specifically for vocal music, which is going to help a lot.
So what about streaming? I see that I can stream a recording directly from your website, or I can go to Spotify or
Well, you can't, I mean, you can get a link to streaming from our website. We've never been directly in the streaming business. For a while, we were selling downloads directly from our website. And we had MP3 downloads. And then for the folks who wanted the super high-end audio, we had something called FLAC files, which were absolutely gigantic. And I remember if you wanted the Pacifica Quartet's Shostakovich box set, you had to do 24 separate downloads.
Oh,
high-res format.
yeah,
So
yeah.
got to be a bit much. So we link to streaming sites, but we only sell physical CDs directly through our website.
Physical CD.
But we're on all the platforms, and we have Naxos of America is our distributor, physically and digitally, and then the Naxos has international distribution through something called Naxos Global Logistics that gets us into over 60 countries around the world. And then with the artists, depending on the situation, we pay artists either an upfront fee or a royalty on sales, or sometimes some combination of the two. In general, when it's a featured artist, I actually prefer to pay royalties because I want them to be invested in the marketing of their album, and that's obviously a good incentive. When it's somebody who's a quote unquote side player, let's say you're doing an album with a string quartet and there's an additional instrument, a quintet. Usually the quintet player is going to be paid a one-time fee for joining them on that track or whatever it is.
Interesting. And do you, as a label, do you commission new pieces, new work?
Rarely. I can give one great example, though. When we were planning an album with clarinetist Anthony McGill, who's from Chicago, now principal of New York Philharmonic, and his brother, the flutist Damari McGill, who's principal of Seattle Symphony. We were planning a duo concertos album with the Chicago Youth Symphony, which they were both principals of, growing up in Chicago. Right. And it just happened that we were doing this right when the League of American Orchestras was having their convention in town. And we thought, wouldn't it be great to provide an opportunity for these performers to perform in the orchestra hall showcase for the league, especially if it was a world premiere. Normally we work with Chicago composers, but we made an exception in this case for somebody we thought would be particularly appropriate to the project and who we knew could write something good fast. So we had worked with Michael Abels a couple times before. So he wrote this wonderful piece called Winged Creatures for the two of them in the orchestra. And that was a rare case where Say-Dee actually paid the commission itself. What's more typical, and it's always with Chicago composers, is we will match up a donor with the composer. And the way it works is the donor actually makes a contribution to Say-Dee and gets a nice tax deduction. We then commission the piece from the composer and our benefit is we get the right to make the first recording of the piece. So we've done that on a number of occasions with a number of different Chicago composers.
Interesting. Any plans to expand outside of Chicago, or do you plan to remain?
No, I mean, the mission of the label is, I mean, it's what makes us unique is we're, the only label devoted specifically to the classical musicians of a specific metropolitan area. And, we don't need to look at Chicago. We have so many.
Right, right.
That said, the key is that every project has to have a Chicago basis. So, not everything about a project has to be Chicago. We did an album with Thomas Hampson, for example, but it was all Chicago composers.
Got it.
And,
Okay.
and some of our artists, while they, were born and bred here, are currently based in other places, especially New York, like Anthony McGill, like Jennifer Coe.
Right.
So it varies, but there's always a Chicago basis to every project.
They got to have Chicago cred, right?
Exactly. Yeah, that's a perfect way to put it.
You're gonna have to move to Chicago if you want to get recorded by
Well,
Cedille.
it's funny you say that. I hope I won't mind me telling this tale. Will Liverman at one point was considering moving to Philadelphia and changed his mind and decided to stay in Chicago. And I should back this up by saying we were recording his Dreams of a New Day, his Say-Dee debut album that got a Grammy nomination
Right.
at the time. And we were actually recording it in Indiana because this was at the height of the pandemic. And Chicago was insisting that people coming from other states had to quarantine if the other state had a higher COVID rate. And Will's pianist was from South Carolina, which back then had a very high COVID rate.
Oh, yeah.
So we found a lovely hall in Indiana, which we knew because we'd also recorded the Dover Quartet there and also Gaudete Brass, a brass quintet there at the music school in Goshen, Indiana, is a really terrific concert hall. So as I was driving Will back and forth from our hotel to the sessions, I asked him about this. I said, why did you decide to stay in Chicago? And he said, you. He said,
Wow.
being on board for Say-Dee was a major factor in deciding to stay put.
Goodness gracious.
I'm pretty proud of that.
You should be. Yeah. What do you think we need to be thinking about as an industry in terms of not just recording, but what do we need to be working on?
Well, one of the not really secrets of Say-Dee's success is that the artists that record for us, they propose their own projects. I sometimes help curate a little bit, but they propose what they're passionate about. One artist said to me, we go to other labels when they call us. When we have an idea of our own, we call you.
Yeah.
Because I will be receptive to ideas that, frankly, other labels might think are a little out there. But, what to me is most important is that the artists are doing the stuff that they're really passionate about. And that's what really attracts people. A lot of organizations, I think, turned conservative after the pandemic. I don't know how many opera companies decided all of a sudden it was time to do Carmen again. Not that I don't love Carmen, but
Right.
what really got people interested? Fire Shut Up in My Bones, right? Which Will Liverman, of course, starred in, both at the Met and here at Lyric. Will Liverman co-wrote an opera of his own, sort of an updated Barbara Seville called The Factotum, which mixed different musical genres. Lyric sold out that show every single night.
Really?
Yeah. And it was a wonderfully young and diverse audience coming to that show too.
And it was a combination. It wasn't just classical music, right? Wasn't his collaborator a hip hop guy or?
That's right. I mean, I said it was a mix of musical genres, but it was exciting.